This video is going to cover the move from the Vaishya or merchant Varna to the Shudra or commoner Varna. This video is a little different than the others because in the other videos, we were really having a discussion about history and how historical events we can see reflected in different organizational structures in our own lives. This video is different because what I'm going to be talking about in this video is the present. What I want to begin with is, I know that there's going to be some percent of people watching this video who say, oh, he's talking about a move from a merchant or capitalist mindset into a commoner mindset taking over and becoming dominant. Well, I know what that is. I've heard that before. That's socialism in general, or communism in particular. Particularly the style of communism put forward most famously by Karl Marx. I first want to discuss that. The first thing that I want to say is that Marx makes a brilliant description. Marx and Engels write the Communist Manifesto, which is essentially like the Declaration of Independence for socialism. And they write that in 1848. They're looking at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and they make some pretty good deductions and some pretty good extrapolations out from what they're seeing. Let's talk about what they're seeing. They're seeing people through various different movements. The enclosure movement in England is one of them, but it's happening all over Europe. They're seeing the common people, essentially for one reason or another, being forced off their ancestral lands that they used to use for subsistence farming. They're being forced off so that the aristocracy, who is the owner of those lands, can turn it into industrial agriculture. Now, these people are moving into cities because the only way that they can survive is to start to work in the new factory economy that's coming up. Most of it is basically taking the raw agricultural goods. In England, this is particularly wool and cotton, for instance, that's coming in from the Americas. And it's their textile mills. These are the first factories are creating cloth. The working conditions suck. They're really bad. Now, traditionally, people on the farms, the whole family would work, right? You'd go out. Even the kids, if they were old enough, would come out. They'd help you sow seeds. They'd help you harvest. It was hard work for a short period of time, but there was a lot of time when there wasn't a lot of hard work. And in that time, there would be festivals and celebrations, and life pretty much had a cycle. As they come into these factories, it's hard work, but the thing is, the work doesn't end. Because the amount that they're getting paid really isn't enough for them to survive. This is capitalism, early capitalism. But the thing is, these people have nowhere to go. And very rightly, Marx takes a look at this and he says, well, these factories can't run without the people, so the people really have control. So, what we need to do is if someone can just organize all the people, well, we can just take over these factories, and then instead of the capitalists, the Vaishyas making profit, we could just split the profit between the people who are working in it, and then everybody will have a much better life in these cities. It's a very, very logical point. Great description. Pretty good prescription for the time that he's writing it, but here's the problem. I'm going to illustrate this problem especially in terms of how he extrapolates out what a society will look like when that happens. I'm going to illustrate this problem by talking about Star Trek, the original Star Trek. I know, weird, marks to Star Trek. The original Star Trek was produced from like 1966 to 1969. You know, Captain Kirk, Beam Me Up Scotty, all that stuff, right? Super campy. And if you have never watched that Star Trek because you're either too young or you just, I don't know, you were living under a rock when, you know, you're old enough but you're living under a rock, just go, type in original Star Trek and look through some of the images on Google Images. Easy enough, because that's what we're going to talk about. So this is being made in 66, and it's supposed to be set in, I believe, like the year 2300, somewhere around there. So take a look at the technology that's supposed to exist in 2300 and what society is supposed to be like in 2300. Now, mind you, this is only being imagined in the 60s, right? They have radio, the atom has been split, they have television, obviously. Very early computers have happened. They've sent satellites and various things into space. Okay? And look at how far off their technology is even from what we have today. They're pressing buttons, there's all these little blinking lights. Your cell phone's more advanced than their starship. You know, even if you say, okay, well, Star Trek's campy, Vin, that's not a good one. Okay, 2001, A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick, one of the greatest directors of all times, known for being incredibly detail-oriented, beautiful movie, considered by some to be the greatest movie of the sci-fi genre ever. Go and look at that. Go and look at the control panels there. Okay, 2001, we didn't quite reach that level, but at the time when we do have a spaceship that can travel to Jupiter, I guarantee you there's not going to be like 1970s style push button things on the console. Right? A friend just sent me a video yesterday of a guy asleep at the wheel while his Tesla auto-driving car was driving him to work. And he was knocked out asleep. You know, remember how big in 2001 the HAL computer was like huge? And all these little blinking lights and stuff? Right, so the thing is that when you try to extrapolate out into the future, and again, that's only 50 years. 50 years. When you try to make that extrapolation, and especially when there's a lot of moving parts, as in, well, you're going to have to organize a lot of people, most of whom in this equation are illiterate. You're going to organize a bunch of illiterate people, and they're going to essentially run a business? But it's not a business. So there's some problems here. And one of the things that he also says is it's going to take a vanguard. It's going to take a group of people to lead. And when we look at the history of communism in particular, it's those leaders that have been the problem. Stalin, Mao. Essentially what running a Vaishya operation, which you take over a factory is a Vaishya institution. Running a Vaishya institution without a profit motive, which is, remember, what motivates Vaishyas, what created the factory in the first place. Running a Vaishya operation without a profit motive is like running a church without a God. The only thing, which is basically why socialism, communism, is what I call a secular religion. It is a religion without a God. because that's the only way that you can motivate people. If you don't have the profit motive, you're only stuck with the tools that came before. What were the tools that came before? Religion and the sword. If you run religion without a God, you're only stuck with the sword below. Get it? So wonderful description, but you got to understand, 1848, there's no telegraph, not even a beep, 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 not even Morse code, no radio. The first films won't be seen for like another 40, 50 years. Imagine if you could go back right now to Karl Marx and say, Karl, okay, check it out. Great description, kind of flows like that, but look, I'm from the future, and let me tell you, I'm from a future where there's companies that guys who are just regular guys started in their garages that turned into billion-dollar companies. And they pay all their workers very well. And everybody that works for these companies enjoys working for the company and gets paid and lives a very comfortable life. And people are starting these businesses on their own. They're taking over the means of production. The common man is taking over means of production on his own. How different do you think his prescription would be? Okay? So, we are living in a Vaishya world. And we are living at the crossover and end of that era. Now, just like the spectrum, it doesn't just crash and go down. It goes out relatively smoothly. There are some, fast ticks. But it's a relatively smooth process. Doesn't mean that there's not pain involved for those who are invested in a particular system when that system goes away, for sure. And as I said before, there are big cycles. So we've talked about this big historical cycle. And we've talked about the eras, right? The warrior era, the thinker era, the merchant era. And within each of those eras, there are cycles. And that cycle within the Kshatriyan era, which I would argue, if we're talking about Western history, basically has its peak and crossover right about 500 AD. This is the fall of the Roman Empire. Now, the Roman Empire being the prime example of a Kshatriyan society, a warrior society. They dominate their world and create their empire through purely the sword. Then along comes administrators. They do develop some wonderful Vipra thinker aspects like the Senate. Some wonderful Vaishya aspects like coinage. Some wonderful markets and trade routes. Very effective. And then the empire collapses. It basically goes bankrupt. They can't sustain. Basically, the Roman citizens are getting a lot of free shit. And it can't be sustained by what they're trying to pull in from their empire. So the Western Roman Empire basically fades away. Right around 500 AD. It just shrinks very quickly, like in 100 years. It shrinks from this massive empire down basically back to Rome, back to the city-state of Rome. Now, you would expect at the end of the Kshatriyan era and the rise of the Vipra era, that what would you see? Right? Who would be the individuals or groups who you would see them start shooting into power? So Vipras, thinkers, we know that their power base is what? We talked about it, religion. The Western Roman Empire falls back to Rome. See, but there's a second Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, often called the Byzantine Empire, the capital of which is Constantinople, named after Emperor Constantine, whose contribution is making Christianity the official religion, a religious city. The Eastern Empire doesn't fall. Constantinople stands. And right around the time that the Western portion is shrinking back to Rome, the Kshatriyan piece of it is dying. The Vipran piece of it is growing. In fact, that's right around the time, right mid-500s, that the Hagia Sophia, that beautiful domed, now it's a mosque, but originally a Byzantine church, considered one of the great architectural wonders of the world, is built. This place is growing. It's on the upshoot. So religion now has become a power source. So now we're talking 500, 550, a little further south. Oh, there we go. Brand new religion. Incredibly powerful religion. Islam, right around 600, comes up. Now this is a religion that grows not out of the Kshatriyan age and helps the flip, but a religion that grows out of the Vipra age itself. And within like 100 years, they are knocking at the door of Constantinople. And they do take it. And then the caliphate spreads. Religion now takes over the areas that were once controlled by the Roman Empire. It fills the vacuum. Islam fills the vacuum. Almost the exact same landmass areas. Almost the exact same areas. It just fills it right in. Vipra. And you have Vipra power growing in other ways. You have the re-rise of the Catholic Church. And now it's a fight between religions. The Muslims are kicked out. You have the Vipras rise. Right? And then you have a fight within the church. You have Martin Luther doing his thing. You have England ditching the Catholic Church, establishing their own. That Vipra strain comes fully into power. And I'm going to argue that the same thing that happened in Rome, where the Roman Empire basically went like this, the Kshatriyan portion and the Vipran portion rose, we see that in the Vipra-Vaishya crossover all the way over in the Americas. The Enlightenment. And these guys coming out of it. Now, the founding fathers, Vaishyas, merchants, planters. And when we say planters, these guys weren't farming. You know, the ones who had slaves, that was industrial agriculture. Industrial agriculture. They were industrialists. They're capitalists. These are capitalists grabbing power. And what do they remove? State religion. Separation of church and state. And then, over in England, bam, the French Revolution kicks off. And who's leading the charge of the French Revolution? The bourgeoisie. And what are the bourgeoisie? Where you hear the term bougie? The bourgeoisie are the merchant class, the Vaishyas. They start to come to power. You have the enclosure movement kicking off in England. You have the Industrial Revolution and factories there. And is it any wonder you've got 1776, if we're going to mark that as basically the beginning of this Vaishya era that we're living in. And in 1777, little baby Nathan Meyer Rothschild is born, who we just talked about. The Steve Jobs of money. Maybe the most important Vaishya of his era. 1776, 1777. So now let's talk about what, as we've moved into this era fully. The other thing about this that I want to point out is you'll notice each of these, the era gets shorter and shorter and shorter. Right? This is basically a reflection of advancing, because when you've got just the Kshatriyan age, and then you move to the Vipra age, you now have Vipra and Kshatriya. And you now have Vaishya and Vipra and Kshatriya. So the momentum is pushed. And every time you abstract, and every time you increase communication, every time you increase trade, every time you take the number of people off of just the farm doing subsistence and get them doing something with the mind, you speed this process up. Basically, the technological advances add on to one another. The tools become tools to build other more complex tools that work faster. This is expressed in technology, Moore's Law. You could go look it up. It's why you've seen technology, particularly information technology, advance so fast in just the last 100 years. Because you get a tool, use that tool to make a tool that can make other tools that can make other tools. And, when you have people talking about AI and the singularity, it's basically the moment where that goes, pew, and now just computers doing it. And artificial intelligence is able to move this whole thing much faster than we are. Will we get to that? Who knows? We're talking about the present. So, in a Vaishya age, I'm going to use kind of I'll use it. We're going to call it the mark of the beast, right? The mark of the beast. It exists in every age, at the height of the age, and how you know you're at the height of the age. Kshatriyan age, remember, it's about the kingship. At the height of the Kshatriyan age, you cannot survive if you do not have pledged loyalty and allegiance to a king. You'll be wiped out. A king will just come in and take over. And if you're not willing to do what he says, you're dead. At the height of the Vipra age, you cannot do anything unless you have loyalty and participation in the church. You'll be marginalized or killed unless you have participation in the church. Even if you're a king, have to have the blessing of the church. It becomes the mark of the beast. This is particularly true in Islam, particularly. But Christianity was pretty brutal in this respect too. I mean, inquisitions are no joke. They're a black mark in history on Christianity. At the height of a Vaishyan or merchant Varna era, what you're going to see is you are not able to survive if you do not participate in the market. Do we see that? Well, do you have to have a job to eat? Do you have to have a job to have a roof over your head? Do you have to earn income? Some of you are saying, well, no, there's some people on welfare, they don't have a job. Okay, but how do they get their welfare money? It's either a check or bank card. Deposit in a bank. Well, banks are the main players in the market. How would you survive if you just said, I'm not going to participate in a bank, I'm never going to use a bank, I'm never going to use money, because currency is, again, remember, part of the market. It only is there for the market. How would you survive today not participating in the market? You'd die. You'd starve. Even a homeless on the street, what are they begging you for? Change? Change? You got any change? You got a couple dollars? You got some way for me to participate in this market? Because if I can't participate in this market, I'm going to die. That tells you we are in a full Vaishya society. It's not important that you pledge allegiance to a king or a government, not in a full Vaishya society. As a matter of fact, in a full Vaishya society, you could say, fuck the king, fuck the government, and nothing will happen to you in a full blast Vaishya society. In a full blast Vaishya society, you could say, fuck religion. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. God is dead. You're an idiot for believing in God. You could go up to the Pope if he's in your country and you could flip him off. Nothing will happen to you. I mean, some other people who are around who are diehard Catholics might beat your ass. But the Pope won't do anything. Now remember, this is the same office of a dude who sent people off on crusades, who was torturing people in the Inquisition until they converted. Full Viper society. But full Vaishya society, they don't even have to do that. You don't want to participate in the market? Psh. You're toast. You're just dead. So, as we've discussed with the other Varnas and the other shifts, as the Vaishya Varna comes to full blast, and remember, the Vaishya concept of control is profit. The market is an aspect of the profit motive. The exchange of two things with a profit at the end is the market. It's expanded out to now include the entire world, but it is the basis of the market. You go back to the primitive marketplaces, that's all it's about. It's about merchants going to make profit. So, as we talked about with the other Varnas, this profit motive, far advanced, creates some issues and some competitive advantages that Shudras are able to take advantage of. All right. I don't want to go too long with this video, so I'll cover them in depth in the next video. But what I want to say in this, and you can think about it before watching the next video, is that basically the two moves, the two concepts that are the basis for a competitive advantage for a Shudra. Now, Shudras do not operate in the market. Or at least they have the ability to survive outside of the market. They always have. A true Shudra is outside of the market. When the mind state was, remember, when the Shudra mind state was dominant, how were people living? There was no market. Where did you get your resources? You got them out of the air, off the ground. You shot them with the bow, or you farmed. So there are two things, and this is why I say we are coming to the crossover. The first is debt. Debt. Because debt is a pure profit business. It is a money-to-money exchange. It is a ledger balance business. Remember we talked about ledger balances. So it's debt, and it's the debt that individuals have, and it's the debt that governments and large organizations have, and they have that debt to the same groups. The most powerful vaches in the game. And we'll talk about why that's important. And then it meets up with the other aspect of the perfect storm, and that is automation. Technology advancing to the point where automation makes it so that people simply cannot participate in the market. That human beings cannot participate in the market. And that's a slow burn, but it's not that slow. And it's even at the point right now where by recognizing and making certain moves, you can benefit from the existence of both of these things and their swift move to bring down the equivalence of that Roman collapse. What I want to say about this is not to scare you. This is not scary. Human beings are adaptable. This is not an apocalypse. This is not, there will be pain. You're seeing pain in places right now, like Greece, like Venezuela. If you're in the US or you're in Europe, it's not going to look like that. And it doesn't have to be uncomfortable. In fact, it can be very enjoyable. Very enjoyable. And you can see your standard of living increase greatly from where it is right now with very little work. Just a knowledge. I had a CEO that I worked for at one time. Kind of bougie guy, right? Went to private school with kind of the aristocracy in Britain. Knew a lot of people, particularly in the music industry. It was an internet music business, kind of a forerunner of SoundCloud. And I remember he said to me one time, he told me a story. He said, when I was in business school, I don't know where you went to Wharton or something like that. When I was in business school, this guy came in and spoke. And he said, do you know what the definition of leadership is? The definition of leadership is finding a group of people all going in one direction and standing in front of them. So I'm going to break down what the direction is and how you can stand right in front of it. And that's going to be in the next video. So if you have any questions or you want to discuss, please let's have this conversation. Facebook.com/VinArmani. Thank you very much for listening, and on to the next.